criteria, gender, education, socioeconomic kind of characteristics, and so on. And in that small space, we introduce a particular way of understanding deliberation, right? I am not sure Habermas would have endorsed this type of conception, and I have not read anything that suggested that, because indeed his broader point was precisely about the public sphere, right? And how the political institutions relate to the public sphere and how the discourse that emerges in the public sphere should be connected to the ways in which institutions operate. That's why I think one of the key elements to assess to what extent citizen participation and this type of democratic innovations has democratic legitimacy and can propose a democratic horizon is precisely this connection between the small space in which the democratic innovation is taking place and the broader public sphere, something that is mostly missing in most of the democratic innovations that are being proposed. Of course, there's always the example of Ireland in 2015, 2016, where there were the cases of abortion and gay rights, in which there was like a really almost kind of magical situation in which there was a small citizen assembly that had a lot of discussions. They voted, and actually afterwards there was a referendum, and the voting within the assembly sort of matched the result of the referendum. So there was this assumption that it was representative, right? In reality, I don't think that there are a lot of cases like that. In France, of course, there was the Convention Citoyenne pour le Climat that was set up by Macron in 2018 that was, I think, widely publicized and that had a lot of impact in the public sphere. So in that sense, that was something positive, but at the same time, it's something, I think, rather exceptional if we look at the majority of other democratic innovations that are taking place, and certainly of the ones that are taking place at the European level, be it in the Conference on the Future of Europe or the European citizen panels that the Commission organized. Because after the conference ended in 2022, the Commission made a big investment in putting forward more citizen panels of the sort. The innovation of these new panels was that they focused on specific things. So whereas in the Conference on the Future of Europe, they focused on very broad terms, economy or something like that. In the post-conference panels, they selected very specific terms, like food waste or something like that. So my critique a little bit of this type of panels that is specific to the EU because it's the places that I have observed. I have spent way too many weekends in the Commission. They still haven't given me a badge as an employee. But I think it is also applicable to other types of democratic innovations. So broadly, this type of relation between the small space of deliberation and the broader public sphere is generally missing, which is something that I would argue is essential to build and to foster agonistic contestation, to foster debates. It didn't really happen. A key element that is often missing in these spaces, and that was certainly missing at the European level, is the role of intermediary actors. So a lot of the logic with which this type of democratic innovations operates is assuming that the sortition-based citizen panels are representative of broader society. And in doing so, they sort of cut the link with intermediary institutions. For instance, trade unions or political parties or civil society organizations. And in some ways, it is actively almost contentious to this type of actors. So it operates in a way in which sometimes you can see some of these spaces as being in competition with civil society. And for example, I think the Commission is very hostile to a lot of these civil society actors because they think that they can sort of pollute some of the deliberations because they are not representing citizens, whereas these kind of spaces do represent citizens. So I think that is also a particular characteristic of this type of spaces that I use the term disintermediation, right? So you break with the chain of representation in which a lot of these type of actors, such as trade unions, that are meant to represent vis-a-vis the institutions, are sort of taken away, and okay, you know, let's just build a more direct relation between the institutions and the citizens via this type of places. And that's why, and this is the term that I used in the book that I wrote on the Conference The Future of Europe and the post-conference panels, which is the democracy without politics, right? It's a conception of democracy that in some ways I think lacks politics, because it makes democracy almost an administrative question of, okay, you know, you just need to make the right spaces, create the right artificial spaces, in this case these citizen panels, and they will be sort of representative of broader society. I mean, I have a lot of good anecdotes, but maybe one that is very representative of this type of logic is that, of course, you know, we made a lot of these critiques. I mean, people in the institutions that are organizing these kind of things, they know what the critiques are, right? The main critique is that no one really cares about this. Like, you know, why are you doing this citizen panel, you know, but, you know, no one reads about it, no one knows that this is happening. And the main kind of thing that they came up with is like, okay, you know, what can we really do, you know, to make sure that people know that we really care about citizens, right? And in some of the citizen panels organized by the Commission, they basically hired a set of influencers to follow the panels and hope that the influencers would sort of create content about the panels and basically make them cool, you know. So in some ways, there is kind of this sense that okay, we are doing the right things, you know, people just don't really know about it, so how can we, you know, encourage them to do that? And they thought, and this is in some ways the logical conclusion of this chain of thought, right? We're doing the right things, we're just creating these spaces where deliberation is at a very high level, and we just need more people to kind of learn about it. Of course, it's a very problematic logic, because ultimately what happened, both in the case of the conference, but also in the case of the Commission panels, they ended up reproducing the logics of the institutions. So what happens with this type of spaces is that they are very easy to be co-opted by the organizers. So the ways in which these panels are framed, to a large extent, determines the ways in which they deliberate and the type of recommendations that they come up with. So, you know, to put a few examples, I mean, I can offer a lot, but the first post-conference panel was on food waste. And at the time, the Commission was putting together this strategy, which was called From Farm to Fork, right? It was kind of an attempt to build a logic of how food was sort of operationalized throughout the whole chain. In the end, what happened, and the Commission was already pushing in that direction, is that it was a very consumer-oriented, individualistic logic, in which basically, you know, to put a very close example, they invited, as civil society, someone that recommended, you know, people to join food banks, you know, to, you know, encourage people to not throw food, and so on and so forth. So ultimately, if you organize some of these panels, what happens is that you can control to some extent the outcome of these panels. And this comes to the next element, which is that these panels are often and have created a new market. You know, because we may think, oh, you know, this is good because, you know, like these institutions are listening directly to people and so on. And instead of the unions that are, you know, very biased and, you know, political parties that are very polarizing and so on, you know, we just listen directly to citizens. But wait for it, because instead, you know, this kind of disintermediation is not an entirely thing, right? It's really a different type of intermediation that is happening, because there has been a new market, the market of basically citizen participation, democratic innovations. So there's a lot of consultancies that have emerged in the field that whose expertise is basically to organize these things. And in this case, for example, the Commission is subcontracting all the work of this type of citizen participation to basically two companies. In this case, Mission Publique and IFOC, that are the ones that are getting most of the contracts in this space. And these type of actors, we can have some, I think, good questions about their democratic legitimacy, because if we talk about the legitimacy or lack of it of some unions, well, what are these actors that are operating in this space have as kind of democratic legitimacy to be the ones that organize these kind of things? So I'm not necessarily hostile to the idea of democratic innovation. I want to make sure that I pass that message across. But I think it is important to understand, what are the logics and what are the mechanisms underpinning it. And this is the creation of this new market is certainly one of them. And now I come to the key element that I kind of want to talk about today, which is AI. Because what I have described so far is, okay, since mid-2010s until, 2 or 3 years ago, right? Or until now. But I think with the emergence of AI, 2 or 3 years ago, I think some things have changed. And one of the things that has changed is, okay, we have these big tech companies, how do we democratize them, right? So technology emerges as an object of deliberation. And then people in citizen participation say, hey, I have ideas about how to democratize technology. Let's just use citizen participation and democratic innovations to democratize technology. At the same time, and this is the kind of other side of the coin, what we're seeing is that technology is also seen as a way to improve deliberation. So, we have here two dynamics operating in parallel. There's increasing attention for how to democratize technology, but also how do we use technology to improve deliberation and democracy, right? And what is interesting is that, here, basically, this is people in STS or in science and technology studies see participation as a solution, and people in citizen participation see technology as the solution to some of the problems. And here is where the dynamics that I have kind of explained above, before about some of the issues that have within citizen participation, I think are only worsened by the emergence of AI. And so far, most of the literature is like, okay, it is not a bulletproof solution, but basically AI can help to take away some of the work that basically some of the moderators do to make summaries and so on and so forth. In reality, what I think is happening is that it only makes it worse. And I'll put a few examples about that. The first one is the Habermas machine. Because the theme is Habermas, so let's just talk a little bit about Habermas. So Google DeepMind, the AI kind of part of Google, some engineers thought, okay, the problem with deliberation is that people have difficulties in arriving to consensus. How can we kind of sort that out? So what they came up with is with a technology called the Habermas machine, which I think they probably should have asked Habermas whether he was okay giving his name for that. They came up with a machine that basically aggregates a set of inputs and constructs a consensus. So within this type of AI, you have a group of people that are given a set of questions that are responded individually, and ultimately, and doesn't matter how many people are there, and ultimately the machine articulates a consensus that people can live with, or that the machine thinks that people can live with. According to the engineers, and to be fair, quite a few people in the literature, this is helpful because basically it facilitates arriving at consensus. The problem is that the logic of deliberation is also that deliberation is a point in itself. It's not just, you know, a process towards getting to a consensus. There's a point in deliberating itself, right? There's a point in constructing a political community in which people discuss about things. Even if we don't agree, you know, it's good that we're all here in this seminar, right? The Habermas machine removes that and goes directly to the kind of logic of efficiency in which basically you don't even need to deliberate to arrive to a consensus. You just input individually in different ways so that the machine itself constructs the consensus. So this is the Habermas machine. I'm happy to respond to a few more questions about it. But to me, the Habermas machine is an illustration of some of the trends that are happening at the moment and that are, quite frankly, going very wrong, including, for instance, some colleagues in the Stanford Deliberative Democracy Lab, which is based in California, of course, and that are working very closely with Meta and with other big tech companies to articulate tech platforms that are in some ways help to deliberate. In practice, I think first working with these companies, and I will talk a little bit more afterwards, can be very problematic. But second, thinking that we can use AI in a way that facilitates and fosters democratic dynamics is highly problematic. And I have seen some of these dynamics directly. So for instance, here we have the DALE images, which is the AI that creates images from OpenAI. And in the context of one of the commission panels that took place in 2023, I think, there was a panel on learning mobility. So Erasmus and these kind of things, right? And the organizers, some of these consultancies that I spoke about before, the organizers thought it was a good idea. Okay, you know, I mean, of course, a lot of these, you know, citizen panels tend to be very white and tend to reproduce dominant socioeconomic characteristics for the simple reason that people that agree to participate in a lot of this process have to give up a lot of their time, and it is also not super easy to, you know, necessarily join some of these processes. So ultimately, it intends that a lot of people with highly educated backgrounds, more white and so on, tend to appear. So the organizer thought, okay, you know, what can we do to, you know, make it more diverse? What we will do is they will create in the working groups, they will use AI to basically create images that resemble the profiles that they want to address. So, you know, say that they wanted to say, okay, you know, how can we, you know, care about, let's say, Ukrainian refugees or people that would not be on the panel, but that wanted to be represented, right? To me, the way I kind of read it, this type of logic was a highly problematic one, precisely because on one hand, they are eliminating or they are actively sidelining, you know, trade unions or, you know, migrant activist organizations and so on. And on the other, they are asking the participants to imagine through AI this type of profiles, right? So in some ways, they are replacing, you know, people with images created by AI. Another example was also in another panel that the commission organized. This panel was on virtual worlds. This is not exactly AI, but it has a connection to it. So in the panel on virtual worlds that was organized by the commission, they said, okay, you know, how can we foster or how can we encourage people to kind of have a direct experience and have kind of a very close kind of connection to what they are talking about? So what they came up with is they created a sort of commission version of the metaverse, which is what you see here on the image on the right part. So basically, these panels are three 3-day sessions, so 3 weekends basically, from Friday to Sunday. And the first session was taking place in Brussels, the second was online, and the third one was in Brussels. For the second weekend that was taking place in their homes, they said, okay, you know, we will have this session, you know, through this kind of metaverse. So they gave people, you know, these meta goggles, you know, where you would just put them and, you know, you would just see, you know, a room, even if you were at your place. People were like creating their own avatars and things like that. Ultimately, it kind of looked like a Sims version of it, you know, or Sims, yeah, it's like a kind of like a game, right? And yeah, for what I saw, they didn't give me the goggles. That's the thing that I'm mostly upset, that I don't have the meta goggles. But I could still observe kind of, you know, the dynamics and how it affected. And ultimately, it was mostly a waste of time, right? Because, I mean, first you have a lot of people that, you know, don't know how these things work. You know, there's also questions of, you know, knowledge about technology and so on. But ultimately, the problem is that all the focus of a lot of these discussions is put on the technical point. You know, how do we, you know, make people, you know, look through the goggles in a way that it's realistic and so on. And ultimately, what this happens is that it displaces entirely the kind of actual dilemmas, the things that, you know, you're meant to be discussing there. So in the end, the virtual worlds panel ended, as we might expect, with very pro-business, pro-big tech actors. You know, we have to, you know, include more discussions with stakeholders and, you know, big tech actors, and, you know, between the industry and civil society and institutions. So a very kind of the typical line that you would probably expect as well coming from the Commission. So ultimately, what I'm trying to say about, you know, how technology impacts the type of democratic innovation that is happening is that it only reinforces the worst traits of the citizen kind of assemblies or democratic innovation. So it doesn't create them. I'm not saying that the introduction of this type of methods creates new dynamics, but it reinforces the things that I think are most problematic from this, which are, on one hand, the disintermediation, so this kind of logic of breaking the intermediary actors from trade unions to political parties and so on. So that's one dimension. The other is the depoliticization of things, because it encourages a much more technical kind of logic that moves away from more political debates and more kind of contestatory ones. And at least in what I have seen, maybe you have also other examples in which there have been some interesting practices of contesting institutions. But what I have seen so far is that, both in citizen assemblies, but also with the introduction of technological tools, it is very difficult for people to contest what institutions are saying, and it ends up being a very easy ride, or too easy ride, to institutions that are organizing this, and indeed to the consultants that are organizing these processes. Now, trying to provide a little bit of a bigger picture here is, okay, AI, citizen participation. Okay, this is interesting, but what does the normalization of AI mean more broadly, and how should we relate to AI currently, and particularly in the relation between AI and democracy? Most of the focus, both including here, including on the citizen participation and so on, is really about AI in relation to knowledge production, or to, how does it impact discussions. But what often is sidelined from a lot of these discussions about AI and how can we use AI for good and so on is its materiality. It's the material component that AI entails. And of course, the kind of political economy upon which this is based. So AI cannot, AI is based on stealing a lot of data and training a lot of these models on that data. Is based on surveillance, is based on labor exploitation, because in order to train AI, you need a lot of people working on the data annotation and the content moderation, work that is mostly happening in the global south, primarily in Kenya, and Venezuela, Philippines, and so on. And it has a very heavy environmental impact. And so far, most of the things that we hear about is really about, how we have to construct more AI data centers, because otherwise, we're going to lose to the Chinese and the Americans. And indeed, the current European Commission is really going towards this kind of logic with the digital omnibus that has been put forward last year. So I think this dimension of looking at AI not just from an epistemic point of view, but also from a material one. So what is the material impact that this has? What is the business model upon which it is based? In some ways, a lot of this AI, the more we use it, the more data that these companies are gathering and so on. So that's why I am kind of, and maybe to finish a little bit on a more provocative kind of side, okay, this is the bad things. Okay, what's the horizon? Where can we kind of go towards? And here I want to kind of reclaim a little bit the history of the Luddites. The Luddites were a group of actors in early 19th century in the UK, where we saw a movement of industrialization and a lot of machines being introduced. And the Luddites were actors that were destroying the machines. The move to destroy the machines was not an anti-technological kind of move. The move to destroy the machines, on the contrary, I think, was based on, okay, what is the impact that these machines are having on society and on us particularly? Because if we think at the time, the people that were part of the Luddites, they were skilled weavers, so people that had built skill in knowing how to make textiles and so on. And with the introductions of the machines, the owners of the companies, they used this as leverage to downgrade their material conditions. They say, hey, now that we have the machines, your skills are worth less. So we're going to pay you less, or we're just going to bring other people that don't have your expertise in order to make your situation more precarious. And the reaction from a lot of these actors was to indeed destroy the machines. I think this is a kind of interesting history to take into account now, because in some ways we have to think, I think, about not just whether technology is progress, but also to what society this progress is taking us towards, and do we really want this progress? What are the costs of this so-called kind of progress? Luckily, there have been some interesting moves. So, for instance, the content moderators in Kenya unionized for the first time, and they created a content moderators union that they are trying to make it. They are trying to make it transnational, which is, I think, a really interesting move. And I also, in relation to deliberation, I also thought it was really interesting the move of the Palestine encampments, because it's also very kind of illustrative of some of the dynamics. And it was a pity, I think, that a lot of the actors working on deliberation actually didn't look at it at all. So that picture on the right is a picture made by a friend of mine in Florence, where they had one of these Palestine encampments, and it was not just particular to Florence. Here we also had in Brussels, across the US and across Europe. And I think this type of deliberation that is combined with a more activist kind of logic, and also integrating a lot of the civil society actors, human rights organizations, and so on, has more potential for building a more kind of resilient democracy. And this is, of course, at a time in which a lot of these big tech companies that are driving AI are a central pillar of anti-democratic kind of directions, right? And here, of course, I'm thinking of what is happening in the US with Trump, the tech oligarchs that are at the head of these companies, and their links and their increasing links to the far right also within Europe. So, and here maybe I will end with this quote by Audre Lorde, black feminists that argue that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And I think in some ways, if we want to think about the relation between technology, AI, democracy, deliberation, and so on, we have to not just look at these tools from an epistemic perspective, but also from a material one, and look also for other horizons that might offer more democratizing potential. And maybe I'll leave it here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Alvaro. It was a fantastic presentation, a lot of food for thought. I think it can create debate as well and discussion. I'm sure in the room there are plenty of questions and comments. So I'm going to circulate the microphone between people. So who wants to start with comments, question? Who's ready? I guess we all need to digest both the lunch and the presentation because there's a lot of food for thought. Yes, Ike.
Thank you. My name is Ike Bicone. I'm a professor in media and journalism at the VUB. Thank you very much for an interesting presentation. I'm wondering whether there is there a scenario where you could marry democracy with technology in a certain way? I certainly understand the fact that technology is not neutral, and so that aspect is based or is rooted into capitalist logics. But do you think that AI concretely is always or will always be, per definition, rooted in those logics? Or is there a scenario where if you bring it back to the commons, it could also have some interesting avenues, for example, for deliberative democracy?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ike, for the question. I think technology is necessary for democracy, and the question is what type of technology is contributing to it and which one is not. So I'm definitely not making an anti-technological argument. I think it's an argument against certain types of technology. In the case of AI, I would probably argue that there might be some very specific types of work that AI could do and contribute to. So I could imagine, some very concrete logics with which AI can operate. Okay, you want an AI for doing some sort of accounting, and then you train that AI on that on the data that you give it. I think the type of generative AI that we have at the moment is entirely incompatible with any sort of democratizing potential. Both for the ways in which, the way in which it is built. It is built on, mass data extractivism. It is managed by, a handful of companies. I mean, we might want to think about, some commons of AI, but the reality is that the current generative AI models are just corporate ones. And I don't see any, AI that may be competitive from a commons perspective emerging, and I'm not even sure it is desirable at this stage. So yes to technology and democracy. I think there are types of technologies that can be very helpful, but if we look at the current type of AI that we have, I don't know, maybe you can point, to some examples, but I don't see them. I mean, I speak to a lot of the people that are organizing, and okay, they tell me, okay, AI is helpful to, do the moderation. Okay, yeah, but that is just because, you just lack more people to do that. Or no, AI is helpful because it helps to summarize the discussions. I don't know. Maybe this is something that is, can be better done by someone, and you're also just outsourcing to a technology, a task that probably should be done by a person. So I don't know, but maybe there are other uses. I'm open to it, but yeah, I haven't found translation. Okay, translation is something that I can kind of agree with, okay, but it's a very narrow task, and for very narrow tasks, I could say, okay, maybe, but as an overarching perspective.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Alvaro, for the presentation. You are making a strong case against AI, so it's very difficult to push you back on that. And I completely agree with the fact that AI is not neutral and all was just said. But especially on your last point about giving AI very narrow tasks, especially in digital environments where we could think about new ways of implementing deliberation. Don't you think that AI could be used to scale up a bit the deliberation design that we can think of, especially for the moderation? If you ask AI just to summarize the discussion, if you ask AI to translate, if you ask AI maybe to moderate a bit, seeing that, well, what you just said is maybe too straightforward for the quality of deliberation, and here it's a very sensitive point to say that, I know. But yeah, if we give AI this tiny task, isn't it the perfect opportunity to replicate all the, I mean, democratic innovations on bigger scales?
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. I think, I mean, there's a few colleagues that have made this argument. I know Sami McKinney with people in Democracy Next, they had this paper, and the question to me is, what are you scaling? What do you want to scale? And why do you want to scale it? And I have a problem with the logic of most of the democratic innovations that are put forward, and I am not sure I want to scale that. So in some ways, may it be helpful to scale up some things? Probably. Will the scaling be contributing to democracy? I'm not so sure. You know, so I'm certain that you can be more efficient and you can narrow to some of these tasks and so on. But I think that the hope in AI is not only misplaced, is actively counterproductive, I think. Because, okay, yeah, it can help to moderate, but, how does it do it? And what are the, epistemological and ideological kind of directions in which it is doing it? And shouldn't that sort of thing also be done by people? I don't know. I mean, with this overall kind of framing of, just wanting to expand it as much as possible, scale it as much as possible, I think that's in some ways part of the problem, that maybe we have to think, okay, what are the actors that can contribute to have a better democracy? Where should we be focusing on? And I am really not sure that democratic innovations are, that's why the case of Palestine I think is interesting, and that it is a pity that a lot of the community working on deliberative democracy did not pay attention to it, because it is a moment in, you're talking about scaling, okay, suddenly you have Palestine encampments in universities across, the EU and the US, and no one is paying attention to it. I mean, talk about scaling, and it's scaling in different ways and not obviously in homogeneous ways, because it takes one form in Brussels and it takes a different form in Paris and another one in Rome, and that's great. And I think the logic of AI is also driven towards this kind of scaling at the cost of homogeneity, and that is something that I'm not comfortable with.
I can jump because I have the microphone, so I've got power. I've got two questions or remarks, and one relates to power and the precise task that you explain with the Habermas machine, the one that kind of arrive at the consensus based on the expression of people's opinion within the assembly, right? So one of the criticism that we can have about deliberation and this kind of deliberation without technology is that it still reproduces inequalities and power relation between those who speak a high language, people who are able to convince others. So I was wondering whether the machine can kind of not erase inequalities, but see, does it allow kind of make some people's voice heard better because the machine consider them as to be equal? You don't have this kind of like people who not impose, but like are able or have the better capacity to convince others that their point of view is better. So I was wondering whether the machine at some point can do that. So that's one question. Or I think it's a question of power. Where is the power? Because then the power is in the machine, right? And the second one, which is very trivial. So we are in Belgium. We have coalition government. They have party programs that are, for someone it's about like 1,000 pages of policy proposal, and they take a lot of time to negotiate. So at one point we could ask if maybe using AI could be a solution to kind of arrive at compromises or consensus between the parties. This is very trivial, but it also makes me think about all the use and like dangerous or positive use of AI for like traditional politics or representative democracy.
Yeah, thanks, Carol. Those are great questions. I mean, first, the Habermas machine is not public, so it cannot be used. It's a prototype for now. So I haven't used it myself. I have only read about it. And Nicolas, he also did some interviews with some of the creators and the engineers behind. But I think what you're describing is a great point in the sense that I think that this type of logic of AI only reproduces those inequalities and makes them even worse in some ways, right? Because if you have people that are supposed to be trained precisely in understanding the sensitivities around power relations, they can be in a room and say, okay, you know, be sensitive to that and say, okay, you know, maybe there's someone that has not spoken because of X and Y and Z, and they can be attentive to that. In the case of the machine, it's a machine. I mean, I don't know what we are kind of expecting from machine, but that's why the argument that I'm kind of making is not so much that AI is creating new dynamics, it's more like it's reinforcing the worst parts of current dynamics. And in some ways, the Habermas machine is a good example of how, while we're trying to, you know, find kind of a neutral mediator, what we are doing is finding a mechanism that is only reinforcing these kind of inequalities instead of altering them. So, ultimately, that would be a little bit my response. And but I mean, I know it's frustrating, but I mean, I think that thinking that outsourcing some sort of legitimacy to a quote-unquote neutral machine is kind of part of the problem, no? Like, I mean, if it's inefficient and if it doesn't work, well, we have to find collectively better solutions to address that, not just expect that, you know, the solutions are given by a machine, in this case, a machine that is produced and managed by people that have a direct stake in it. Because, of course, a lot of these companies also want their machines to be normalized in society as much as possible. So, I understand how frustrating it can be, but at the same time, I think, you know, deliberation is part of the point. And even if it takes time, I think there is an inherently positive component to talking and trying to find ways. Yes.
Okay, so thank you for the thought-provoking presentation. I really think it stimulates debate, so that's great. So I want to push you a bit. I want to push you a bit more on one of the questions that Caroline asked. I think that if you, and you argued for this in the beginning of the presentation, if you look at deliberation from a systemic perspective, that AI has a lot of, is having a lot of emancipatory potential in some regards, besides the, I think, very valid points you made about the drawbacks. And I'll give you an example to push you a bit on that example. So I know a couple of people who have severe dyslexia, right? And we all know that a lot of deliberation in our society, in the public sphere, it happens through writing. It happens through who has the power to hold a pen, right? who can, for example, write an opinion piece, even within the workplace. If you think about within workplace deliberation, who can send nice mails, can send convincing mails? Well, a couple of these people, I have real-life examples, they can now express themselves in a clear and structured way in their according to their own ideas and their own preferences and defend their own interests better. So is this not an example in which AI can serve also as an emancipatory tool for deliberation in the written words? That's my challenge for you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the question. I might get into a difficult space here because I have no expertise on dyslexia. And I'm sure that AI might be helpful in, helping people to make better the arguments. My problem with it, and I had this exact discussion with a colleague that was saying, well, shouldn't we use AI because, in academic context, it helps us better to write in English. And, because, I'm, native Spanish or native French, it's not so easy to adapt, to the standards of English, in academic journals and so on and so forth. And I'm very skeptical about this for the simple reason that AI also entails, to some extent, de-skilling. So the more that you use AI, the less that you will be able to, learn to do some tasks in the future. If I start, academically writing books and articles with the help of AI, in 2 years' time, I will not be able to write on my own. So and that's why I might be getting into a bit of a problem because I don't know the specific context of dyslexia and so on. But I think we should be looking for ways to ensure that our learning processes and our own skills are enhanced by ourselves. And AI is simply an kind of artificial help that may be helpful in the very short term, but on the long term, I have much more doubts. Thanks.
Thank you. I would like to take the discussion a step further from the tools and the mechanisms, which, as you said, are already there for a couple of years now, and AI is just an instrument in the end as part of a bigger exercise that the European institutions are having to engage citizens more, to produce more responsive policy making, and so on and so forth. But I would be curious to hear from you about the impact that you see of all these tools and mechanisms. We have Citizens Assembly, we have now the Citizens Engagement Platform that also uses AI already to summarize the comments, to facilitate a bit the interaction between different users. However, based on the discussions that you had, based on the experiences that you had, how do you see the impact of all these mechanisms that are being introduced, and whether this impact would be somewhat enhanced by the inclusion of AI, and there is indeed a strong advocacy for the AI to facilitate online deliberation, particularly for the Commission?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Katerina. I think ultimately the logic with which AI is deployed is indeed how can we make it easier for people to participate and so on. And of course I want more people to participate, but at the same time I am also cautious about the ways in which people participate, because participation in itself is not necessarily a positive thing, in the sense that it depends on how meaningful that participation is. It depends on the context of that participation. And what I'm seeing is that, yes, it is in some ways making it easier because, you can generate, content and so on. But at the same time, I think it is making it less meaningful, if that makes sense, in the sense that you have to think less when you're participating. And to me, the most important dimension is that this is really, especially in the case of participation, is really oriented to the individual. It's really oriented towards how can we make citizens participate. It's not oriented towards, okay, how can we enhance the voice of unions? How can we enhance the voice of environmental activists that are campaigning on this or that? And I think there is a trade-off there, and there is a competition, and I think most of the times the Commission in particular is really going towards a very individualized conception of participation, in which the agent that participates is the individual, not collective actors, not unions. It's really the individual, and AI is being very helpful for that, because AI can help you to write text and can help you to participate in a way that is, it takes less time.
Thank you for the presentation. It was really interesting. I also, like Nina, also would like to push on a couple of things. And one is that, so you start from the assumption, and I think we can all agree that AI is not neutral, but it's not that the technologies, I mean, a technology is a technology, is that who is developing it is not neutral. So I wonder whether the focus of the problem is not the tech, you raised some problems on the technology per se, you just did now, but to me, I wonder whether politically the big problem is in the fact that it's not neutral. And then for the technology per se, on the last two things that you said, right, you make two problems out of this. One is the individualization, and one is the fact that it's going to make us basically intellectually lazy. And so I am surrounded in my faculty by people who study technology, and the thing that they always remind us is that with each single individual technology, we add this. We add it with calculators, so we won't be able to do maths just using our hands. We add it with the internet. Oh, I mean, my mom was really worried I would not be able to read an encyclopedia again, right? And I even remember that when I started to study statistics, they made us do regression by hands, which was utterly useless. I'm really happy I have Stata now, right? And I can do a very fast regression with my very advanced technology. So I actually wonder whether how you think that AI is different in this sense. And for the individualization thing, I completely understand where you're going, but there is a concept in political science that we call political efficacy. And although I understand that collective action is proven to be more, let's say, qualitatively better at under several lights in several ways, it's also true that political efficacy, it's an individual characteristic that you have. And the fact that you can give this input maybe can have a positive impact on how you feel that you are have an efficacy towards the institution, not having to join, for example, an organization. So it's true that it's, let's say, cheap participation, but it could improve political efficacy, that we know that also improves trust in institution, improves turnout to vote. So these are my three questions. I'm sorry I was too long.
No, thanks a lot, Luana. Yeah, I appreciate all the questions. Maybe starting with the last one. First, I'm not sure trust in institutions is a good thing, because somehow it is a relation between, okay, you participate in this, you respond to this public consultation, even if it's using AI, and therefore, you trust more institutions. I guess there's a connection there. I am not sure trust in institutions is a good thing. It depends what institutions are doing. I think mistrust in institutions is a very healthy sign of democracies, of having critical people that are questioning the legitimacy of certain institutions and certain policies. And that's why I think that the ways in which we should think about is how to respond collectively to things. And I am, of course, an individual, and I think we all have our own individual ways of thinking, but political problems are never individual ones. And that's why I am a firm believer in collective actors. Me as a worker, as an individual worker, I have very limited power. Me as part of a broader union that represents millions of workers, yeah, I think I have more power. So I think a lot of this type of participation, it is not only cheap, it's actively delegitimizing the logic of collective action, because, and the Commission is using it precisely in this way, we consulted citizens, and And yeah, but maybe you shouldn't necessarily consult citizens in this way, but rather actually engage more clearly with some of the unions that have long-standing demands about workers' rights, about environmental protection, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think if we move towards this kind of logic of political efficacy conceived in very individual terms, I am not sure what emancipatory potential can we kind of find, or at least I don't find one. And maybe to respond as well to, is AI different to calculators and so on? I think it is fundamentally different. And I think there's something about the epistemological of it, but there's also something very material about it. I mean, AI requires so much more energy than anything that we have had before. I mean, it's destroying, it's so energy hungry. Now they have to build tons and tons of data centers only for the sole purpose of powering a technology that I'm not sure to what extent it helps us too much in building a better democracy. So I think the materiality of it is massively different. And I think there is also something about the epistemological dimension, particularly in terms of the descaling. But I think we're closing. Yeah, I'll just finish it there. Thanks.
Yeah, you can have a final word. There are still some questions, I'm sure. There are some questions for the coffee break, so please don't go away, don't run away. We've got another guest today, so we're going to do a short break, having a coffee, finalizing some questions and debates with Alvaro, and then we'll have Philippe Braconnier here, who's going to move towards a more artistic way of thinking about democracy, or a more democratic way of looking at art. I don't know, we're going to see. But please stay and enjoy a nice coffee break with our guests. Thank you, Alvaro.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you all.